All right, so there it is, our lovely Losi Rock Rey, the kit I built from scratch here. And as you can probably notice, it doesn't look too healthy. That's right, the last time I had it out in the woods on a very cold day, I hit a little tree, a big tree actually, and ended up snapping one of these turnbuckle mounts that this actually bolts onto the top of the front diff case. Snapped in two, as is prone to happen in the cold. There you go. Broke it. Not such a tragedy. This part is actually pretty inexpensive to replace because there are a few weaknesses that this thing has, namely some of the plastic parts, especially when you start to run 3S like I'm going to do. So, first, what do we have? We have a Hot Racing replacement part for that broken plastic piece. Hot Racing makes a lot of really nice upgrade parts for the Rock Rey and the Twin Hammers and other rock racers out there, but this is actually, I think, a pretty worthwhile upgrade for the Rock Rey. As you know, you can go crazy with aluminum upgrades on your RC. Definitely can take it too far and not always necessary. In fact, it can be counterproductive to use aluminum on some parts. But if you're smart about it, you can definitely upgrade your truck or car and make it better and last longer and not break when you use it by being smart about which ones you choose to do. So if you're building your kit, I would say this one is worth doing right off the bat. And it's not even that expensive. The second one I got was this guy here, another Hot Racing part, and this is the shock tower brace, which basically braces the two towers together. You can see here is our stock piece, and this one is going to replace that. So that could, offer a little more rigidity to the truck as far as the front end goes. But I would say of all the upgrades I got, that one is probably the least important. The second upgrade we're working with today is another Hot Racing part, and this was one that I had my eye on from the day that I built the car, and this is the aluminum steering Bellcranks set from Hot Racing, obviously. I feel like that is one of the weaknesses of this car, is that plastic setup that we have in here. All plastic parts. And that, will affect the steering, right? If the plastic is flexing as you're driving, then you're going to have a little bit of a vague feel to the feeling of the car, especially when you're trying to toss around these big, meaty tires. I would have liked to have gotten the aluminum servo mount for it too, but I didn't have it in the budget, so this is going to have to do for now. I've heard good things about these, and it's also blue, which kind of matches my truck. And the fourth and final upgrade we're going to be doing is rear shock upgrade. So I did a little bit of research, asked around on the forums, and this is the way to go. So, the shocks that come on the truck are basic at best. I've already replaced the front shocks with the Traxxas GTR rear shocks, but the back, I noticed as I would drive and hit jumps that the back was very bouncy, right? So the front would be under control and the back would want to bounce up. That's where these come in, right? So this is your Proline 5-inch shock. They're actually built for the Yeti XL, but what I like about them is that they're aluminum, they have dual springs. You can just tell that they're very good quality compared to what we were working with. For the shocks, I've already filled them up with 32.5 weight Losi oil that I had from another build that I had actually just laying around, and that sounded about right. I'll spare you the footage of me filling shocks. I've already gone ahead and done that, and I've actually even installed them on one side of the car already, just to kind of make sure that they fit, because I had only heard they fit. I didn't know for sure. So there you see it. I think you might notice that I have two different things going on here, and I'll explain that in a second. But if you look at the action that goes on here, you can see that this side returns a lot slower, right? The right side bounces right back down, and the left side has a nice controlled movement. And that is partly because of the better shock, but secondly, because I have a second damper on here, which is kind of cool because it's scale. The real kind of desert trucks will have something like that to help keep the car under control, the truck, I should say. But to achieve that, if you get the upgrade shocks, all you need to do is take the spring and the collar off of the stock shock and mount it in the second position on the arm. So you already have the mounts, you know it's going to fit because it's stock, and it's just going to add a little bit of coolness to the truck and possibly even a little bit of extra stability. That's pretty nice and smooth. You can absolutely tell a difference between the stock and the upgrade side of this car. But first, this is a pretty big job. You know, to get to that steering part of the truck, you have to basically rip the whole car apart, at least the whole center section of the chassis. The body's going to have to come off. The cage is going to have to come off. Not that hard of a job, but time consuming, right? Because there's 16 of these screws holding the body on alone. All right, my drill made pretty quick work of those screws, and our shell pops right off. So the next thing we have to do is remove the cage. I'm going to leave this panel attached to the top. No need to take that off. But in order to remove the cage, you have to take the shock tower off, because it won't get past that. So you have to kind of just remove the shocks if you can, and then there's 4 screws that hold that together. Take out the screws that hold the cage onto the chassis, and then you're free to work. All right, I've spared you guys watching me taking out all of those screws. Really want to focus more on the install of the new parts. So hopefully that did it. Just have to get this to clear. A little bit of a struggle. There we go. Pieces flying, dirt coming out. And there it is, separated. Still some mud left in there. It's actually a lot cleaner than it was. It was very dirty. And here you see the interior of the Rock Rey post mud run. My ESC has seen better days. I don't have a very good way of installing this because it's meant to be bolted in place. I have it double-sided taped, but that has clearly failed. The only thing that's keeping it in place, I think, is the actual body itself. It's kind of straddled in there. You can see my little homemade loom there to kind of clean it up. And just lots of mud gets in there. I wish I could stop that from happening, but oh well, that's just part of it. But now that we have that apart, we can take this off, and that's going to be the second to last thing we'll replace. But unfortunately, to get to that steering, this whole center chassis brace has to come out, and that's a couple screws, like maybe six screws that hold that on there, and then we'll be ready to go to start to get to our steering assembly. So more screws coming out. All right, so let's take a look at our steering Bellcranks system here from Hot Racing. Really nice, nice quality. You can tell it's a lot stiffer, nice and smooth. Your kit is going to come with both halves of this. It comes with 2 screws, and then you're just going to use the stock spring for the servo saver right on top there. So basically what you have to do, I'm glad it came pre-assembled. It should just slide in once we undo the servo saver here, and should be a pretty much direct bolt on. Let's see how it goes. Don't forget to use a little bit of Loctite on those aluminum into aluminum parts. Pretty damn important if you want it to hold together. Very smooth, very stiff. I like it. Good job, Hot Racing. You make a good product so far. Next step, put in the turnbuckle brace up here. That should be go in like a snap.
He's my main man. How do I exactly make money, and why is it that the people? Yes, that was amazing. That's the plan. He would right out. He was frustrated. He was like, "What the fuck, man? Because he did get shoot. Watch him. He was getting somebody." And when the set over, he pissed off. His match was missed. Crazy. Just watch him. This thing I got to do is play a chance. Play a top 2 change out. Just watch it. The difference between play who's pretty good versus world championship. How the so his technique's so clean. His angles are perfect. He's just effortlessly moving the cube on the table where he wants it. He sees clusters of problems with the guard.
All right, so there you have it. You got your Hot Racing upper link mount installed there. Still into this plastic diff case, and I know that SSD just came out with a really nice aluminum one. Probably would have been worth getting that while I had the whole thing apart and installing it, but that would have required ripping the whole front end off the car, and so far this one's been good. I will admit to you that stock, this came with a little washer that went between some of the gears in there, and I didn't include it because when I built this truck and I did put it in, the mesh seemed way too tight, and I've been hearing that these things will rip the gears apart, especially on 3S. So I didn't include it, put it all together, and the mesh felt perfect. So I don't know. I wouldn't take that as gospel, but for me, it's worked so far. So maybe that'll work out for you. So the next step is to put on our suspension tower back onto here. No, I'm sorry. If I did that, I couldn't get the roll cage back on. So maybe we'll go to the back of the car and finish up our rear shock. All right, so here's your stock rear shock, and here's the Proline. You can see it's definitely bigger. It's definitely more travel, which is okay. Better more than less, I think. And you can tell that it's definitely a little bit bigger diameter as far as the shaft and the body of it go. And overall, just much, much better quality suspension. But I'm not going to ditch this. I'm going to do the same thing on this side that I did on the other side and have a kind of a dual dampener setting. Now, the one thing I noticed when I was putting the new Proline shock in was that it's a perfect fit except for this little lower collar. You can see how it's flanged a little bit more than the bottom part. And I had to shave a little bit of the insert of the trailing arm down here just to get it to fit in that hole. So I just used an X-Acto knife and kind of just chopped out a little bit so that it would slide in there. Other than that, it's a very easy install. All right, so everything's back together. That one went in a little easier, and you can see pretty slow action here. You got to remember that if you do the dual dampeners, you're going to slow things down a lot. So this might be a little too slow, right? So you'd want it to be slower if you were really driving it fast and taking big jumps. But if you have plans to crawl with this, you don't want it to be stiff and slow. You'd want it to react quicker to the terrain. But I do a little bit of both, and I like the action so far. That's much more controlled than the stock setup. But the verdict is not in on the dual dampener thing. I might end up taking those off if I'm not happy with how it drives. But for now, that looks pretty awesome, I have to say. On a side note, it's also worth mentioning that the Proline shocks come with a second spring set. These are stiffer than what I have on here. I wanted to go with the softer spring. I'll save those for another time. Maybe they'll come in use at a later date. Next step is to put on the cage, put that back on with all the screws and everything, get that mounted back up. Then we can tackle the shock tower and install our last aluminum upgrade part, put the body back on, and we're good to go. There you have it. Hot Racing center brace installed. I didn't record it because it's very straightforward. It does come with some new hardware with the kit, but it's pretty much identical to what comes with the kit. Save that hardware for another project, but now we just got to install this back on the truck, put the shocks back in, we're all done. And there you can see all of everything installed. Looks pretty tight. I like it. Definitely adds a nice little flair to the front of your car, and hopefully it's a nice little performance upgrade. That this whole thing should be a lot stiffer and last longer. Back together, everything's back in place. We have our Rock Rey back, so just looking at that rebound of that rear shock, much slower, right? It's got a lot of droop. I like to keep it low. I don't want it to be riding up real high in its travel, and it should be an interesting experiment. That is definitely a lot slower than the stock spring. So taking a big hit when it lands, it's not going to bounce like it used to. At least that's the idea. Very, very plush car now. So only time will tell. We'll see how it performs on the trail. And that concludes my little upgrade video here. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. Lots more driving time with our Rock Rey out in the woods and maybe some other places too. All right. Thanks again. Cheers.